All right, everyone, good evening. It is Tuesday, January 17th, 2023, and we are gathered here at Athens-Clarke County City Hall with the Commissioner and myself, and we are here for two purposes this evening. We have a brief special called session to consider a single item under suspension of rules, and then our normally scheduled agenda setting session, for which final action will happen the first Tuesday in February of this year. For the purpose of the special called session, Madam Clerk, can we get a roll call?
Davenport.
Here.
Taylor.
Here.
Wright.
Present.
Fisher.
Here.
Poole.
Here.
Culpepper.
Here.
Myers.
Here.
Horton.
Here.
Hamby.
Here.
We have a four.
All right, thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, given that we are considering a single item under suspension of rules, I do need a motion for suspension of rules. Got a motion for suspension of rules from Commissioner Hamby and a second from Commissioner Thornton. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, again, we are just here to consider a Victim of Crime Act grant for staff position in the Solicitor General's office.
Motion to approve.
Second.
I've got a motion from Commissioner Hamby, second from Commissioner Hool. All right, these oftentimes come very quickly as we have to be responsive to the timeline of the federal granting agency, which is the case here, which is why you're getting this relatively late in the game. This also has a budget ordinance attached to it, given that we would be accepting grant funds. So to read that ordinance for us, please, Attorney Drake.
I'm trying to find it. I'm online. I'm looking. I don't see it with it. Is it on the table? I was looking at the link through the Mayor Commission meeting, special call meeting. Where should I look for it at?
It should be on the 001 item on the electronic copy.
Judge, you want me to bring you a copy of it?
Yeah, it might be good because I'm not seeing
Yeah,
it.
I got it too, so yeah.
Thank you. An ordinance to amend the FY 2024 annual operating capital budget for Athens-Clarke County, Georgia, so as to provide grant funding from the Prosecuting Attorney's Council of Georgia for one full-time position, associated expenses to support assistance to crime victims and for other purposes.
All right. Any further questions about this item? Commissioner Hool?
I just have one question. It's noted in here that there's a slight reduction in the VOCA funding that we're getting, and that's something that I think I was first alerted to a little over a year ago from a nonprofit director in town. Can staff share with us any info they have, or perhaps request from the solicitor's office any info they have on the projected future VOCA funding? Because there's kind of a budgetary impact on, how much we have to make up for the training costs and things if we want to continue to see these offices operate at the same level as the grant amounts decrease. I think it's like about a $2,000 impact this time around, but, are we looking to see that return to its former amount after a year or continue to decrease? That'd be helpful to know.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Any others? All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion carries. All right, given that there's no other business that we have to create final action on, entertain a motion to adjourn the special called session.
So, second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Fisher, second from Commissioner Hamby to adjourn special called session. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, we're going to go ahead and move on to our agenda setting session. And as is always customary, do want to first ask, would any commissioner like to remove an item from the consent agenda for discussion first,
There's only two.
before I call for public input?
There's only two, right?
There are only two. All right. For members of the public, there will be several opportunities for public input. We're going to have an opportunity on the consent agenda, then an opportunity on old and new business, and then individually, we'll have input on planning and zoning items of 3 minutes. In every case, that 3 minutes will involve a light in front of Clerk Spratlin that will turn green when your time to begin happens, yellow when you have 30 seconds remaining, and red when your time is up. So would anybody like to provide input on items on the consent agenda? Again, these are items 1 and 2. that's for the public.
What are you doing? I know what I'm doing.
All right.
Mayor, on number 2, is there any way, just in general, we can, all the commissioners can learn about these? We talked about it in the agenda setting meeting, that, is there like a one-pager so all the commissioners could learn and use?
Just to understand how that neighborhood
Yeah,
notification
and
process
maybe-
works.
And get it operating in their particular districts. It would be helpful. It'd be helpful for me, I know.
Manager Williams, that's something we could get from staff.
Good idea, yes, we will do that.
Perfect. All right. All right, new business are items 3 through 8. Would any member of the public like to provide input on any of these items, 3 through 8? Crickets in City Hall tonight. All right, we're going to come behind the rail for discussion. All right, item 3, we discussed in a work session last week. This is the health services contract for in-custody residents of the Clarke County Jail. We've been on a month-to-month basis with current contract, and this would go into a more permanent standing with a provider. Input from any member of the body? Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, I sent some questions to the manager's office on this, but I think it would be really helpful for us because to understand in an easier to digest format the difference between the old contract and the new contract and the RFP requirements. Because this is a doubling of that cost, and it seems much needed. But it would be very helpful for me to have that sort of summed up easily. I started doing it myself, and I'm like, I'm missing some points in here. The correctional healthcare group that's recommended seems pretty good, physician-owned, 16 years of continuous service. I was really impressed. They never had a legal judgment against it or government partners. And their staffing rate has been really full, like 95 to 98, so they look like a good group. But it would be helpful to know this. I think it's what's actually going on. The costs, I was doing some math on this, and whether the sheriff's office was sort of evaluated this slightly differently. But still, it's a lot of money. I mean, 450 people on average, you're talking about $9,000, $9,500 for each one of those. Those are duplicated people, but a month, a year. And so there's a lot of health care. And so I think for us to be able to better understand it and explain it to constituents, because that's a big increase in our budget going forth as well. So I'd appreciate that
Kind of a
simple
side-by-side chart.
side-by-side chart with what's there, just like we attempt to get for our own health care.
Yes, and I relayed the request. We've gotten some good charts back. I'll forward those out this evening.
Great.
Sorry I didn't have them to you before
Oh,
now.
that's fine.
Commissioner Hool?
Thanks. And if I can reiterate these questions in an email later, because I did not get a chance to write it in advance like Commissioner Myers did. But, I see on the staff report that the average daily population, yields different costs, and that is currently looking at 400 and above. Do we have, or could we get estimated costs if the population were lower?
I can ask. I think that this was, I don't know what the range when they went through the RFP, but we can check that and see.
Okay. Just in the interest of, trying to figure out ways to drive down that population, if we had some dollars associated with cost savings, that'd be helpful. And then I know in our work session, the sheriff had mentioned seeking a contract compliance monitor to see this through, and I see that, the approval of this would then lead to 4 more automatic renewals. So could you just explain if and how that contract will be evaluated to, determine whether we want to continue to automatically renew or revisit?
Well, this is, part of the sheriff's operations, and so I guess he and his staff would be the ones to evaluate the relative performance.
Okay.
So that there would be, things that would or would not happen along the way that would cause them to do that. The contract compliance now, and I certainly won't pretend to speak for the sheriff, but as I ask questions along those lines, the sheriff says that, or shared with me, that, they get charges for all sorts of things all the time. And nobody on the staff's really trained or, in the medical field to know those types of things. And so that was some of the justification that he offered to me for the need for a contract compliance person.
Okay.
Just one. I'm sure he'd have others.
Okay. But the short version is if this contract will automatically renew unless the sheriff's office wanted to initiate severance of the contract.
Yes.
Do another, okay.
And you may note this on other service agreements. It's not unusual to have a 5-year, because it's a pretty involved and complicated thing as we're seeing now. But I think the precedent is that you can't lock a future commission into that contract. So this is one of those ways that, there's automatic renewal. So in good faith, if everybody does what they're supposed to do, it's a 5-year relationship, but you have the opportunity to exit if you need to.
Okay. I think then my second question maybe is for staff to request of the sheriff information on how they plan, like what they plan to monitor in the contracts and how they plan to do so that when we're making this decision, if there's an implication here that we also need to be thinking about a budgetary impact on another staff position, that we've got that information now in advance of the budget discussions. Thanks.
Commissioner Thornton?
So this unintentionally or intentionally is like a 5-year agreement?
The agreement would be a 1-year contract with 4 extension periods.
So if in 1 year there were some other options, the sheriff's department could look at it, or we could look at it?
I'd have to go.
What the Georgia Codes provides this code section, it says that a local government can enter into multi-service year contracts provided certain requirements are met. And one is, it's subject to y'all appropriating the funds necessary to fund the contract. I think it has to give us the right to terminate it each year. So there is a way it can be terminated, like the manager was saying. I would be so the only reason I would see the sheriff's office terminating it would be if the service wasn't up to par, Commissioner. You know what I'm saying? I don't think they'll look unless they're not happy with the service they're getting. But if they're not happy, then they would look. Does that make sense?
So
Because it's been a very complicated process putting out the RFP for this and moving to this selector is taking moving to this entity is taking a lot longer than they expected. I know that's why we're on a month-to-month contract right now. I just want to be straightforward with that.
Well, and the reason I pause, Commissioner, is I don't know exactly what the language would say. Oftentimes a contract just allows either party to notify the other they don't intend to pursue it any further, but there's a notice period. But I do want to echo what Attorney Drake said in that I think they've been at this since last spring. And so it's not, you have to plan ahead a little bit because, food and healthcare is just absolute in a jail environment.
Commissioner Houle?
Commissioner Davenport? Just a comment. And this is not, I'm gonna support this. So my only concern is that it's a large piece of the budget that we'll be deciding on before we get into the process of our budget. And then it will be, I'm not as thorough as Dr. Myers is in reading, but when I read it, it is going to be a significant, because I read it even more thoroughly after our work session, but it's going to be even more significant impact on our budget June, whatever we decide on in this spring. But Manager Williams, can you go over again, and I will reach out to Sheriff Williams, the urgency. I understand they've been working on it, working on this process for actually quite some time, but diligently since last spring. But I understand the need within that facility, but I just want my colleagues to understand it's gonna be a bite come when we start, giving and taking come this spring. But what's the urgency?
Sure. Well, they're currently on a month-to-month, I think, with the current provider, and I don't want to speak for the sheriff as to his evaluation of those services, but I think he did state in his presentation that he felt like that more services were needed, more and different services for some time. And one of my initial questions to him was, well, I hear your interpretation of the way the services being offered is they should have been, not left for so long to catch up, but is there a longer window that perhaps we can gradually step up to that? But I think, the sheriff had stated the need that he had concerns about the level of care.
Yeah, I think my understanding is, we talk about how you may need to sever a contract if they're not operating up to snuff. And I think we heard pretty clearly, and it's also in the report they gave us, that the sheriff's department staff, thinks that they haven't been meeting the terms of their contract, the current provider, while also being responsible for less than this other provider will provide. So I think, if we move forward with Medico instead of the current provider, it sounds like we're hoping to get more than we were before, and also hoping that they'll do a better job of actually following through on the contract. But I guess to that, in that exchange between the attorney and manager here, did I understand you correctly, Attorney Drake, that when you said we have the opportunity to, do you mean we, in this case, the sheriff's office would still be the one to initiate that process and be responsible for that evaluation? And so ultimately, we need to be thinking about, when we're monitoring the terms of this agreement, it's going to be something that they're going to have to be responsible for and communicate to us if they find to their and our chagrin that this new provider is actually not doing the job.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay.
Yep. And I will point out for the edification of everyone here, that constitutional officers are a little different. The sheriff, and the sheriff has worked with our procurement departments, bringing this forward for y'all's review and approval. I think one of the primary reasons is, you control the budget of constitutional officers, and this is a significant budgetary item. Ultimately, the sheriff, if he has the budget, can just sign a contract without seeking your review and approval, but he's working collaboratively here. It's a big thing. So I just want to point that out.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, and Patrick, and Commissioner Davenport, I don't know if this helps, but some of the stuff I remember him sharing with us, the sheriff, during the work session, was that his staff has observed that the residents in their care are not getting the best that they should be getting. So if we have residents, we should be taking care of them medically, mental health. He listed a lot of things, and they're also, this new provider would be helping them in the continuity of care, and when they're in the community, how to continue the medication and the resources that they're getting, which I think was is a big outreach that I think we maybe could have used for the last several years, quite frankly, for some people. But the month to month, I think, is costing them outside of what was the contract rate. And I think that it was just timing for him to get all this in order among everything else he's doing. But again, he's not asking this for raises. He's talked to us about raises for his staff passionately, but I thought he spoke even more passionately about the need for better care for his residents that they take care of. So I plan to support this, and we do have to make some tough decisions, but this is a health and safety issue for the persons in our jail and the people that work there.
Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, quick follow-up here to what Commissioner Wright said, and actually in the opening facts and issues, it really puts down that this is this kind of healthcare is a requirement of Georgia code. So we're also doing what the one is supposed to be doing here. It also mentions in here, when you brought up, Commissioner Davenport brought up the budget. I see in the agenda item that it refers to an attachment 2 for the budget ordinance, but that's not in here yet. If I scroll all down, they're all 1-1, so it doesn't really, we don't have the budget ordinance that's being requested for the remainder of this fiscal year, which would be.
We're doing contingency.
Right, but there's a number to that for these remaining 4 months, right?
Yes, and that we weren't quite sure when we put this together about the exit timing of the current vendor and the incoming timing, you would expect it to happen in this calendar year. So you're right, Commissioner. You deserve an answer as to how much we would anticipate that to be, or maybe a no more than number, but that's going to take a little more digging on.
Okay, but that would be, we have some money, there's some money in the budget for what would be paid on the old one, so it's a surplus for the better one that we would be adding onto this year's budget. And that's not money that's allocated already to the sheriff, that would be new money from our general funds?
Yes, and I don't know what the current contract spells out and what is due the current vendor. We'd have to unwind all that.
Okay.
But that would make sense to me, Commissioner, that there is a budget for those purposes that lives with the sheriff that reasonably might not be exhausted, that could be used. But I would almost guarantee there'd need to be a supplement from the general fund, operating contingency.
Thanks, everyone. I agree that while this is an enormous budgetary hit, this is a question of health, safety, and really human dignity. And you'll read, members of the public, in the agenda report that one of the behavioral health components is really an exit counseling strategy, for these members of our population. And what we want to see, of course, is reduced recidivism. And part of that means very careful planning when people exit our jail. So appreciate everybody's conversation. 4 also follows up on a work session item, and this regards the addition of staff members in the district attorney's office relative to a gang unit there. There were several questions, of course, in the context of the work session. I've not yet received materials pursuant to those questions, but just wanted time for follow-up tonight. So, Commissioner.
Yeah, and I want to thank Manager Williams for giving us that information. We had asked about the number of attorneys, for their cost, and for us on what their starting salaries are. So we got that information. I hadn't had a chance to decipher it. Same thing with what Commissioner Davenport said. $267,000 is a big hit, again, to our budget. One of my concerns is when I went and delved a little bit deeper, they want to pay this person $100,000 for their salary to do gang activity. I still go back to what I said last week, and I hopefully I'm gonna get an answer. I want to look at statistics first. One of her things she put in there, facts and issues, were that as of October 22nd, the ACCPD gang unit had charged 21 individuals with 51 gang act charges through 2022. How many of those have gone to court or have been tried yet? That's one thing I'd like to know. And then second, again, with the assistant attorneys that she have open, why can't we use those particular positions to possibly bring in and train those individuals to train in gang activities? So right now in the formula, I can't support this. So moving forward, hopefully we'll get some more information. I'll get educated a little bit more. But again, the budget, I think, will probably start getting tighter and tighter for us as a community and as a commission. So I would like to see if possible, that you use assistant positions that you got on your staff open to possibly fund that particular job. And again, if you're gonna pay somebody $100,000, that's gonna add to, if you can't hire other attorneys, that may add to some pushback from other attorneys that are sitting there now. So.
Commissioner Thornton.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Commissioner Thornton.
I'm in limbo about this proposal also. We're already talking about, and I think Manager Williams always talk about what we want and what we need. And when we're dealing with the budget, I totally agree with the DA's analogy of the police department and the DA's office working in tandem to deal with the gang problem. Because if they arrest like 100 gang folk and you don't have a district attorney to prosecute, that's a bind also. I think there were a lot of questions that we still made during work session, And I guess we're waiting for Ms. Gonzalez to give us some more information, because there were several different things that was asked. At this point, I probably would suggest that we table this next month, especially if we don't get the answers that we need right now, and to make sure we understand all our options. I talked to Commissioner Hull today, and he I think he did a good job explaining to me what DA Gonzalez was trying to say, as far as, I think she mentioned the did she mention the compression study? Yeah, she mentioned the compression study, but it wasn't clear to me what she was exactly saying. I think that I understand now her dilemma, but if her dilemma is about how we pay ADA, maybe that's what we need to be fixing, if that's the root cause of her vacancies. So I guess, Commissioner Hull, could you explain what you explained to me today? Did I put you on the spot?
I mean, I can do my best. I mean, I get my understanding from the district attorney, and I've heard this from we hear this from a lot of staff people, but I think I've heard this from attorneys kind of across the board, that, there's a struggle to retain talent or recruit new experienced talent because of the amount we're paying just being below what other communities can pay. I guess I do have a question with that in mind, but I'll wait till you're finished.
Well, I guess my point is, if to me, that might be the root of the whole problem. And I would not feel comfortable putting a Band-Aid on this request at this dollar amount until we really get to the root of the problem. Mm-hmm. I do not think that putting that much money and without clear outcomes, we've got to be outcome driven, and I'm just not feeling it right now. So hopefully between now and next month, the questions that were asked, the understanding, I think Commissioner Hull explained to me about the 15% of what we offer, if that's all we're able to offer, that might be the problem. But right now, I'm not feeling, I need some more information if I'm going to support a request like this, given all the other issues that we have going on.
And just before I turn it over to Manager Williams, of course, the sort of broad activity that we always undertake in the springtime is to look at the full budget for the coming year, and part of that is engagement with every one of our independently elected constitutional officers. So these broader questions are ones that we'll be seeing in the next couple of months. But go right ahead, Manager Williams.
All the conversations that I've had on this with some of you, it's not so much taking issue with the concept of having folks who are focused on those things and working with the police department, but more on the funding side. I just learned this today, so I'm just sharing information with you. If funds are your major concern, the next ARPA cycle for the judicial ARPA, that grant submission period is April 1st to April 15th, and then the funds would be awarded sometime in May. I can tell you that there are already some priorities that the folks in the courthouse have identified as far as upgrading some of the courtrooms with audiovisual equipment modernization. But this is something that could be eligible for those funds and might be worthy of pursuit.
Commissioner Wright?
Yes, this is great news, because what I think might be the best approach to, and it came up in the last budget, and it came up when Judd spoke with us about the challenges he was having keeping all the attorney offices filled in his department, is that during the budget cycle, we look at and we study all the attorney salaries in ACC Gov, and if we make the appropriate improvements in the allotments, we're covering the DAs off, all of them, instead of picking a department to have increased salary bracket. And then if this ARPA money is relevant for that, that would be a bonus to it as well. But I would like for us to table or hold or what's appropriate for this particular item so that we can study the salary bracketing that is used within the attorney profession, within our unified government, so that we're doing it across the board and helping in all those areas where they're having challenges recruiting, retaining. Because if we recruit and train and then lose, we're not retrain, just that whole cycle. So that's, if I will be happy to, because I think that's the solution I want. Tabling it, there might be multiple solutions that come up with tabling it, but it doesn't sound like as a group, it didn't sound like we were at the work session. I was hoping that this would have not made it back onto the agenda because there was so much feedback of us not being ready, but I'll be doing a motion to table.
Manager Williams, regarding the kind of human resources perspective.
Well, so, as you know, 5 years ago, we undertook a updated review of our pay and classification study. And I think it was 24 years prior to that since we had done such a thing. So we had no idea how it was going to turn out. And so it wasn't meant to fix all problems, y'all. It's to try to get us closer to where we needed to get. And not everybody felt like they were where they needed to be. And that's, now I understand why people don't do these things for a couple of decades. But we were doing it for the right reasons. And then we went further and came up with a public safety plan. And you've heard from folks who are not happy about that. In this case, how do we maintain a plan like this? Is it upon request? When someone says, well, I don't feel like we're paid what we ought to, because there's other folks in the government who feel the same way. You entertain the sheriff's request, and we did that, and we're working through that now. And I would say that there was good reason for that, because the sheriff has struggled with retention for sure. A case in point is engineers. I mean, I think PUD has been unable to hire an environmental engineer for 3 years. So it is true, or we would sense that it's accurate that some of our professional positions are below, and attorneys are no exception. Totally agree. So what we need to do is come back to y'all with a suggestion on how we do this. And what we had said before is every 5 years or so, we should be taking a look at this, as opposed to just doing this group and that group, along the way. So I say all that to say we owe you some more guidance, or suggestions, I should say, about how we should maintain our pay plan. I do appreciate the fact that the commission did the 7% market increase last year and a pay table increase. And for those of you who don't know, the pay table is for the positions to bring the minimum floors up, and then the market increase only applies to people who are actually in the job at the time. So you may have somebody come right after that pay increase and not have the benefit of that. So you really help to push our people up in the right direction, but everybody else is doing the same. So the market studies that were 5 years ago are no longer, it's a whole new world now. So all that to say, if we need to come back to you with some suggestions about how to do that.
Jesse.
Yeah, so this study that was, and thank you for the quick turnaround and sharing a bunch of information with us by email. The pay grades that are laid out, there's a minimum, midpoint, and maximum. That's based on that study that we did. I'm comparing that to the listings we have on our jobs page, and the thing that stuck out to me is, there's a range of minimum to maximum that you're showing here, but the job listings show a much smaller range that's between the minimum and less than the midpoint. But that midpoint, as I understand it, is pegged to that average. So, I'm wondering if maybe less than a whole new study needing to be done, is there a way to change the way we go about our job listings to allow for people with more experience to come in at a more competitive salary? We had this conversation around lateral transfers for public safety officers. I'm wondering if there's maybe a similar thing that would be warranted here to help fill some of these positions or address some of these issues.
Well, I'm certainly glad to have a work session around this where we can describe all that to you. Commissioner Thornton alluded to this earlier. So the policy that we follow, and the reason why we don't advertise the full range is that, and it's been hard, y'all. It's been hard to hew to this line. but we've done it, and we've been consistent, and we've not been arbitrary about it. But it comes at some expense of losing folks who wanted more money, and that happens a lot, and it happens in a lot of different departments. The policy is that based on education and experience, we can offer more than the minimum. Now, I'm talking about the non-public safety, because now with the lateral transfer, I think we've allowed for people with appropriate experience to come in and be equitable, and that took some time, but we got there. With the unified plan, as we call it, for all the other non-public safety employees, basically, you're offered, so there's a midpoint, which you referenced. So you can add 5% to the minimum salary, 10% to the minimum salary, or 15%, depending on the mixture of education and experience. Oftentimes, if somebody comes in highly qualified, we would offer them at 10% of midpoint. So you take the minimum, the 10% of the midpoint, add it back to the minimum, and that's what we offer. And that's what we've done. We've had folks who have, demoted and wanted to keep their old salary. We've had folks who have, asked me, well, this is not what I want them to make what they made at their old job. Well, that's not part of a pay and classification system, and it's meant for fairness across the board. And, how we change that, we can talk more about that,
Well, I'd certainly be interested in that work session sometime before the budget talks, especially, instead of having to maybe pay for a whole new study, if there's a way for us to kind of address this issue by just revisiting that policy, but doing so in a way that's fair across departments and positions. But also, if we're just losing people and struggling to replace them in all different departments that employ attorneys, there's clearly a pattern here. But I'm sure it's not just limited to attorneys, right? There are other departments and positions that have similar.
Well,
heavy equipment, heavy machinery operators, I know, is another one. So.
Well, I provided you a table on the hiring and the separations, and so you can see what that is across the entities that currently employ attorneys in ACC Go.
A few more, Carol.
Yeah, I appreciate that information and have to think a little bit more on your response there, just to Commissioner Houle, and review that again. And so the district attorney has attorneys 1, 2, and 3 being advertised on our website right now with a range of pay. So there is some leeway there, and the district attorney is asking for more for one of those attorney positions. But can we, I guess this was the other question, can one of those positions, because they're empty right now, be reclassified? I remember in one, I think in the auditor's office, there was discussion of this when something was with HR, when a position was not being filled. And is that standard, or can you fill me in on that?
Sure, absolutely. And, well, so there's 2 ways to deal with vacant positions, You can reclassify, as you've alluded to, and then you can also reallocate. So a reclassification, there is a process for that. It happens usually once a year, unless there's an emergency. And departments, there's normally at least a dozen, if not more, of folks who are saying, this person in this job is doing more than we hired them to do. So they you accumulate these things over time, and then our HR folks look at it, and then they take the extra responsibilities that the person has been doing for some time. So usually, sometimes it can be as much as a year that they've been working on it before they hit that process. Because we've gotten the other way around, well, I'm planning on doing this, so let's go ahead and change it. And HR wants to see that the work's actually being done. Then they regrade it, and sometimes they agree and that it should be elevated. Sometimes they say, no change. And there's a process that usually goes on in the fall. And then I meet with HR staff, they review all the requests and the justifications or recommendations, and then we make those decisions administratively. That's different from reallocation. So reallocation is taking a vacant position. So reclassify happens when somebody's in the position and you want to get paid more. Reallocation is, I've got a management analyst and I want to create a new community engagement person. So that you as a commission and only you can authorize full-time positions. So we can't, the manager can't arbitrarily add new positions because that's a big expense long-term. And so we would say, well, within the authorized positions that the mayor and commission have approved, we can reallocate that for something that we need now to kind of, mold. So those are the two ways to deal with those vacant, or with those types of positions.
I am just very, concerned that we, for whatever all the reasons are, and that's probably very complex, we have a district attorney's office that is so minimally staffed here, and that we are getting a request from the district attorney to deal with that issue. There may be other factors involved, maybe there's other support that could be involved, but we do have a criminal justice system that requires district attorneys to process cases. And so I am concerned about what we can do to help the district attorney and help our whole criminal justice system, function. The numbers are quite low now. And so I feel there's some responsibility for us to take some action, and I'll, talk with my fellow commissioners more about that and others involved, but that is very concerning.
I agree.
And the gang issue, from my understanding of it, does need its own, gang task unit on the district attorney as well, so I'm in full support of that as well. So any way we could help make that happen sooner with the positions we have, so I'd love to sort of do some brainstorming on that, some more on that, so I'll follow up with the manager on that.
And so, Commissioner, what you're leading toward prospectively is a reallocation, where we take an existing position and enhance that position with some new responsibilities. Is that?
Right,
Okay.
along those lines, and then there can be a discussion of another position in another budget to replace, if that was where we needed to go, so I just.
Well, and I should say too that in the information I sent you earlier today, there is, I guess, what you'd call a career path, or a career ladder rather, with the attorneys. You got attorney 1, attorney 2, attorney 3. So beyond the 5, 10, 15, depending on experience, you might be able to be hired in. That's unique to this particular, to the attorneys.
Mike?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. And I don't want to, I'm certainly interested in the discussion about reallocation. If there's several vacant positions, then maybe having a conversation with the DA about combining two of the vacant positions into one, or doing something like that to help meet with the budget of the DA. And I'll say this, and we'll have this discussion as the budget unfolds, but we certainly have many constitutional officers that come to us. Those same constitutional officers are also the same voters that we answer to, and they have to answer to their voters. And I think when we have the sheriff or Clerk Logan or any of the judges come to us, and asking us for help, that certainly we've always considered that. But I'm also of the opinion that if we set a budget at the beginning of the year for these constitutional officers, then perhaps we need to give them some flexibility in how to utilize that budget during the year. And instead of having to come back to us to ask the question about reallocation, or ask the question about attorney's fees, if you could find a way to work within your budget for something, then they ought to have, as a constitutional officer, they ought to have the opportunity to do that. Because we have, they're advocating for their office, and we have a county manager that advocates for the county offices. So it's not totally dissimilar. So I think we need to have that talk, if I'm making any sense there.
Commissioner Thornton?
You said I'm not.
No, I'm glad that DA Gonzalez brought this to our attention, even though we don't have no jammed up solution, because I had no idea about how this budget thing works and salaries and stuff. And if we have a ceiling that prevents us hiring and maintaining good employees, that might be a problem that has been throughout the district, or throughout the community. The other thing, I think, that those are the types of workshops that I want to be a part of, that I learned, that was just by accident for her to have this. I don't think I would know what I know now if she did not come before us. So it just doesn't impact the DA's office. I think it explains some of the other vacancies that we have throughout the county. So again, right now, I would like to know what what I support a gang specialist in the DA's office. How we pay for it is a whole nother, I heard some options here. I think the constitutional officers, if we give them a budget, we should allow them to use their budget. And we should encourage them to come to us, if they got to come to us at a budget cycle beginning, and not when we've got to look at our contingency funds. So I support it. I do think there's some more information we have to have, and I would like to have a conversation more about how people are paid, the compression study, and how raises are. My point.
All right, we'll be following up on plenty of this, certainly in the context of our budget discussion, and looking for some options between now and beginning of the month. Real quick, Commissioner Rule.
Quickly, Manager Williams, you mentioned that the next round of ARPA funding for the courts is going to be released in the spring between now and when we are really digging into the budget. Am I correctly assuming that that funding source, much like all the other ARPA monies that are out there, is something that we'd have to think of as a temporary solution, and we'd have to find a way to make up for that after the fact? Okay. So, I mean, hopefully that can help us solve some of this challenge for the district attorney's office or the courts in general, but I would also just encourage this body to think, like, if we find remedies through ARPA to these issues now, we have to think about sustainable funding for these things once the ARPA money runs out, and, the needs for these offices go beyond, the needs for these offices are only a portion of what we have to think about. You get the whole budget, obviously, and I do think that we should be thinking seriously about the revenue sources we have and how we're bringing in revenue to pay the people that are working for all of our departments, including constitutional officers, what they're deserving. Thank you.
And just to be clear about those dollars, of course, those are dollars that are federal funds that the state controls, not funds to which members of the judiciary or others would be applying to the mayor and commission. So, Commissioner Thorne.
Manager Williams, you said that, did you say that folk could be moved and reallocate those funds to their new position? What did you say about that?
If somebody has taken on more job responsibilities that are in their job description for which they were hired, then they can ask for reconsideration of having, within our pay and classification system, regraded from the pay grade that it is currently at. And that's the mechanism in which we can reevaluate that and, compensate people who have taken on more than what they were hired for.
And I guess my question is, we agreed on two grant writer positions. One of the grant writers has moved to a compliance analyst position.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me how that happened.
Well, there was a position you approved.
For a compliance analyst?
Yes.
And we used...
It's one of the ARPA positions.
But we used the grant writer position was not ARPA. So is it?
So somebody applied for a different job within the organization.
Okay. So where are the dollars for the grant?
They're still there.
So
Nothing's changed. We just had a grant writer who who wanted to take an open job,
Okay.
which we welcome.
So the grant writer position dollars are still in the budget?
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes, can we have a work session in the near future, right before the budget, on paying compensation and benefits?
We'll be looking for that as part of our budget cycle, absolutely.
Just to clarify, Commissioner Hull's correct. ARPA funds are temporary at best. But, there are at least 2 more rounds. So what the timeline for application in April would be for the rest of calendar year '23. And then later in the fall, like there was this past year, September, October timeframe, you can apply for the ensuing calendar year. So you might get 18 months out of it.
Okay.
Mayor, I just have one quick
Yeah.
one. Has the DA asked for reclassification of any of the positions for
No.
for this?
No, and I won't speak for her, but there's a pretty considerable backlog of cases.
Right.
So if she were able to hire an attorney, that has been her first priority, is to put them on these cases, along with the ARPA provided positions that she's currently funded for. That's what they're trying to do, is sort through that backlog of cases and go through it.
Well, I get that, but if she were to come to ask for reclassification of an existing position, that would certainly be considered. Is that right?
Well, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But, so there's a reallocation of vacancies.
No, I get all that, yeah.
But, but they would have to demonstrate that that person does indeed have extra duties beyond what they were hired for.
Okay.
All right. More in the future. All right, moving on to item 5. This is TSPLOST 2018 Project 11 and Project 12, bike and ped infrastructure for Barber Street. And again, this was part of the work session that we recently had together. Commissioner Wright?
I want to be included in when that scheduled walkthrough happens. So I probably have questions, but I'll wait till then for it.
I thought it was a good presentation.
All right, anything else? All right, thanks, everyone. Given there's going to be a walkthrough, we'll leave this on discussion. 6 is another TSPLOST project, and this is public art for the Tallassee Road Bridge Replacement, which is being designated for the very nearby roundabout. Any questions about this one? Is it okay to move to? Go ahead.
Happy to move a consent. Just a quick question. Does this include the area around the roundabout too? So like, for example, that bus stop that's on the outside of the roundabout, or is this just for within the center of the roundabout?
My understanding, and I will verify, is it be very much like Whitehall, where it's the inside of the roundabout.
Okay, thanks.
Everybody okay moving this to consent? Oh,
No, go
okay.
good.
All right.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Number 7 is, again, the Whit Davis and Cedar Shoals Drive Fire Station. Well, it's currently located there. Fire Station 5 replacement project concept. Commissioner Hamby?
And from the presentation at the work session, it seems like we're just voting on the concept, and it'll come back to us in several probably iterations by then. So I'm fine with putting this on consent if that's the will of the commission.
Yeah, I'm good with that. Move to consent.
Everybody good with consent? All right. 7, moving to consent. All right, 8, of course, is pending some more information. This is the community benefit agreement between the Leaven Group and the Unified Government for the mall area TAD. As you saw at the work session, there are going to be 2 bodies that are going to meet. There's going to be the resident body, and then the group comprised of Commissioner Hamby, Commissioner Houle, myself, and 2 school board members. And so we, as a full group, will be meeting on the 31st, a special called meeting to preview this item. So everybody's got that timeline down, and you've got that meeting on 31st on your calendar.
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect.
So that meeting, what we're going to be reviewing at that meeting is the community benefits agreement?
Yes.
So we've recently taken receipt of an amended application. In fact, we had a conversation today about that. And what we hope is that on the 31st, there will have been some deliberation by the 2 bodies the mayor mentioned. We will, before then, provide you some more details about the ask. I think we intended for the developer to be present, perhaps to answer questions, maybe even present a little bit on that. So yes, you will have some of the feedback from the two groups, although on the 31st, the MARC, as it's known as, the Mall Area Redevelopment Committee, which is made up of the school board and our folks, won't have had their final meeting according to the current proposed schedule to make their final decision. But we wanted to give you at least a week's notice with some of the more details in a work session type environment and answer your questions. So there that night, we should get down into some details that will build on what you will learn between now and then.
Following up on that, so there'll be the TAD application for what the developer wants to use the money for, and there will also be a document with community benefits agreement. There'll be two things that will be coming together.
Yes. Well, I'm going to defer to Attorney Drake about the maturation of the community benefits agreement. Before that night, we will communicate to you several things. One is what the proposal is. We will share an analysis that we're have done, a feasibility analysis done by someone with financial acumen that came to us through our consultants. And they will evaluate what's being proposed and pose some additional items or questions for you to consider as decision makers. So we'll provide that to you. And I think in that analysis also, there's another analysis that talks about what the potential impact is to the school. So there's several things out there that y'all will be able to dig into and learn more before the 31st. And then on the 31st, we hope to cover that with you and answer any questions you have.
As far as the community benefits agreement, we hope to have it finalized on the 31st. I'm not going to guarantee that. We just got the amended application last Thursday, and we have a conversation with Dan McCrae, who's a TAD attorney who's been advising us, who will draft that agreement this Friday. We have a meeting with him. I think it's reasonable to think we'll have it, but I just want to make a promise. Obviously, we'll try. The meeting is Tuesday that we'll finally approve it.
Yes, January 31st is a presentation. February 7th would be the vote.
We'll do everything we can to have it to you on 31st. I just know it's a document that'll get drafted by us, so I have to go to their legal counsel for comment. And so,
But we'll essentially know what the request is in terms of dollars for the.
We should know the general terms of the community benefits agreement, but, we'll just sort of funnel it down for the 7th.
Commissioner Hoare?
Yeah, I just wanted to share for the people out there who really want to dig into this, and for everybody here, the 3 meetings that the Mall Area Redevelopment Committee is going to have about this. We're going to have one the day before on the 30th at 1 p.m., and these are all in the Planning Department's building, 120 West Doherty Street. And then another one the day after on February 1st at 3 p.m. And then the third of 3 when we're hopefully going to arrive at a decision point to recommend or not the whole thing to this body will be on Friday the 3rd at 1 p.m.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Thornton?
So, did I, during the work session, isn't there a meeting of the MARC prior to that 31st?
Yes.
And if the MARC does not agree to this, there's probably no need for the 31st meeting?
Those were the meetings I was.
But isn't that
Just referencing?
before?
Yeah, there's one of 3 meetings.
Okay.
So there will be a presentation at the first meeting.
What
and there'll be a
date is
decision
that,
at the
that
third one.
presentation one?
The presentation is the 30th.
Okay, and that's my point. That's the MARC one, right? And if the MARC does not accept or deny, does everything stop there?
So the first meeting is just a presentation.
Mm-hmm.
The third meeting, which will be the 3rd of February, is where the MARC will come to a decision.
Okay, I got you.
And then we'll meet as a body on the
I got you.
7th.
Okay.
And you're correct in terms of the procedure that we've developed with the school district. If the MARC would recommend denial of the request, then the commission would similarly have to recommend denial of the request.
I got you.
But it would still be on our agenda.
But it would still be on the agenda, that's correct.
And then the planning item, which we're about to get to, will still be on our agenda regardless.
I'm not sure, I need to look at what the IGA reads, if it would need to still be on our agenda. Because, and maybe we could, but we got no choice but to do what the Mall Area Redevelopment Committee has said we have to do. But you could just take the position it's dead,
Yeah, we'll
But the
follow
planning
up.
item
Yeah.
will still be there regardless.
Yeah.
And
Commissioner Hamby?
I'm just curious now, you say, if I'm on the mark, so if the mark denies it, then
That's
that's
it.
it. But if we support it,
Then it's got to come to us.
well, I know it's got to
This
come to us, but does this body still have to support it then?
body. No, I think we have the option then to not support it still. I know we do.
Okay.
That was the point I was trying to get to.
Commissioner Myers.
Could someone send out that process and the dates?
The 30th, the 1st, and the 3rd.
It's in the slide.
It's on the calendar.
In Thursday's presentation.
Oh, right, from the one, the
And
same
then
dates
Blaine
as
sent
last
it
week?
out again.
Okay.
We can reset it.
Yep.
All right, so that's process really. We've got 3 planning and zoning items. Item number 11 has been withdrawn, so I'm going to go ahead and shift over here and move my chair back so we can put the screen down. See some snappy visuals. And as just noted, of course, the first item is the planning and zoning question for the mall, which is these addresses, 3700, 3706, 3708, and 3710 Atlanta Highway, and this is a planned development. And so go ahead and turn it over to Planning Director Brad Griffin.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, sir, this is a request for a PD at the noted addresses on Atlanta Highway. For intent and purposes, this is the mall. The request is to change a small portion of it, currently identified as an employment center, future land use to general business. So this does come to you as a type 1 PD. You'll have 2 zoning votes on it, first for future land use, second for zoning. And then a redevelopment of the mall to a residential, commercial, and office mixed-use neighborhood. A significant amount of the mall is to be demolished, the balance to be renovated. 72,000 square feet of new commercial, 1,188 residences. You see the bedroom counts there. 986 of those in a multifamily configuration and 202 townhomes currently. There's a large linear green space that runs through the middle of the project, and just under 3,000 parking spaces, including both decks, on-street, and surface lots. There is phasing associated with this. A project of this size could take a significant number of years to build out from start to finish, and I think that's important as we get into the phasing drawings that I'll show you in a minute, and specifically some of the conditions that the Planning Commission is requesting that you consider if you choose to approve this. See the overall property here, everything that is in the red highlighted area is part of the proposal. The 2 small parcels, brought my laser pointer, Commissioner, so you can see now without messing it up. So this is Burger King, and Burger King is not part of it, and then Zaxby's is currently not part of it, nor Pet Boys here. Everything else is included. You see the small area up in the top, that's the employment portion that would need to change to general business, which would be your first vote. The zoning, for all intent and purposes, stays the same, just with the plan development being added. And then the overall development plan that you see here, the large building you see right in the center, that is the balance of what would be left of the mall, and just for orientation purposes, this is Belk. This is kind of the dividing wall where you go up the escalator currently into the Sears area. Everything from that point west would be removed. And then on the other side, this is about the door of the food court, and to the right would be taken off. And I'll show you a couple pictures in a minute with that. That center section stays. You see the linear park with parking that would work through the center of the property. And this is one of the areas on this property that is really, from front to back, north to south, relatively flat, and lended itself well for this type of a linear green space and kind of an avenue area for commercial office. The building to the right here is the entire frontage of that is ground floor commercial with multifamily over the top. This building has just a little bit of commercial in it, the rest of it being multifamily. This is an exclusively residential multifamily building. They are proposing about a 3-acre portion behind what is now the Burger King to be worked into a west side potential multimodal center that would function, and that I think gets into some of the community benefit agreements. You won't see any of that in our reports because we've separated. The zoning decision should be a zoning decision. The TAD decision should function independently. So that's why there's very little of that, if any, in our staff report that we have written for you. And then across the Huntington Road frontage here, and then wrapping around, those are all townhouses with a senior living facility at the terminus of this linear park. There's a band shell that is built into right here, and some additional amenities as well. So that's kind of an overall overview of what they're wanting to build. You see the phasing here. The purple is the first phase, and that's the center that you see as 1A with the bus facility as being potentially 1B. Phase 2, that would include the loop road redesign, redevelopment. There are 3 roundabouts that are proposed. One at the primary entrance where Zaxby's is now, one at the Huntington Road. This is the area right in around where the little ATM machine is over here, where that roundabout would go, and then a redesign where Maryland Farmer runs into the mall access road into a roundabout as well. So there is redesign there. And then the 2 green areas, they've opted to either be a phase 2 or a phase 3. But you know, for a project this size, it could very easily be a phase 2, could be 7, 8, 9 years from now before they ever get to that. And I'm not placing time limits, but that does build into some of the nature of the conditions that we propose to the Planning Commission that are a little bit different from what you guys are used to seeing as conditions from us, but I'll explain that in just a minute. This is a little bit hard. This didn't quite turn out the way we wanted it to, but we've tried to drop the drawing on top of existing conditions. So you can still see the belt building here. You can see where Macy's runs off at an angle in this area. But from a standpoint of looking at the linear park, this is the front, and that's the area as you're approaching it from in front that would be removed and work all the way through and come out right about here on the backside where Macy's is. And that's pretty flat all the way through, and that's why I think they have identified that as the ideal location for that linear green space and park. So that all of that section of building and everything to the east from there, including Penny's, would be removed. And then just some examples of some of the buildings. This is building 3 elevation. I think this is the purely residential building. This is the east elevation of the mall that is facing the linear park. So that's the portion of the existing mall that will remain once they tear off everything to the east of it and they put in the linear green space. That is the proposed elevation of how they would modify that as a final recommendation. And then this is the building directly across from it on the other side of the linear green space. There is a deck incorporated into this. This is a 5-4 split building, I believe. So when you get on the back side towards Huntington Road, it is total residential, but it is up 1 level. And so we've asked for there to be some type of a public access. This is a really long building from one end to the other. So if you're in the townhouses, for example, on the east side of this building, and you want to get down to where the green space is, you should have the ability to get through that somehow with a bike too, not just on foot, without having to go all the way around one direction or another. And they have agreed to comply with that when they get into final design. This is the back of that same building. And then this is building 5, which I believe is the building that showed up as either being in phase 2 or 3 down across from where Pep Boys is now. And then 7 is, I think, the one on the west side. and then just an example townhouse. The architecture is pretty generic at this point. Planning Commission recommendation is to approve, but there are 9 conditions listed in the staff report on this one. Without going through all of them in detail, I think we have a confidence level along with the developer's land planner that all of these conditions can be met, but you do see some language in the staff conditions that is asking for a little more ability for staff to administratively work with them in design when they get to that point to make some changes without it having to come back to this body for approval. I mean, there were certain things that would be set in stone. They couldn't increase their density. Anything like that would have to come back. But for example, once we get into phase 2, which could be several years from now, the townhouse in very large multifamily building may not be the thing that people are building then. There may be a different design opportunity or option. We may have worked our way through the missing middle housing and people are doing different designs. And so we tried to afford an opportunity if they wanted to do a couple of other housing types within that townhouse area, for example, as long as they didn't deviate from the density, that's something they could work through administratively with us in-house. The planning director would certainly always have the authority under that condition that if he or she felt strongly that it still didn't meet the spirit and intent and they wanted to still make that change, it can always come back to this group as the fallback option, but it does give a little bit of administrative ability for the planning staff to work with the developer in hopes to come up with as good of a project as we can at the time that it's moving through. So with that, the Planning Commission recommendation was unanimous with the conditions listed in your staff report.
Thanks, Brad. Before we get into commission discussion, want to see if there's any public input on this. Rules are always the same, 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Scott Haynes. I'm a landscape architect. I work for W&A Engineering, located at 355 Anita Street here in town, representing the owners of this property and the collection of parcels that make it up. I think it's pretty clear at this point that the internet really has broken the interior mall model. As the conveniences of online retail have grown, we've seen it literally reshape the landscape of brick and mortar retail, and probably none more dramatically than the interior mall. This, of course, is not just an isolated issue that we see in our own community, but across America. So it's interesting that with such a modern problem that we can look to history for solutions. For far longer than the interior mall has existed, the town center has been a choice to how communities have chosen to organize their community activities. And we find that looking at that model is given us a lot of direction in what we've seen to revision this site. It offers things that the modern patron wants. They want a place, they want placemaking. They want something that brings them to a site as its primary function, and then they choose to shop potentially as a secondary activity. That's really what we're seeing across these different projects that's bringing people to these sites, hence combating what we're seeing as online retail devastating brick and mortar type retail. We believe this project is a landmark project for this community, but not just for this community, because I believe that if done well, it can serve as a model for other communities and how they can see to revision their malls too. Because as I mentioned, this is not just a problem that we have, but we see it across America. Offering things like green spaces, a mix of uses, putting pedestrian type infrastructure ahead of autocentric type infrastructure. These are all things that we're leaning towards now, and I think it's a beautiful thing. I'm extremely honored to be part of this project and in a community that's really been so instrumental in creating this plan. This is a sum of all parts between staff members and design professionals and community, engaged community folks. This is a collection of a lot of effort. I'm really humbled by that. I think that this is something we can all be proud of when we see it through. I'm really here tonight to answer your questions. We will be back at the February 7th meeting to provide more formal presentation. But if there's anything tonight that I can offer, please let me know. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haynes. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak regarding this submission? All right, we'll go ahead and join you for a discussion. I always begin with Commissioner who represents the district in question, and that's Commissioner Houle.
Yeah, very excited to see this project come before us. It is definitely an area in dire need of transformation, and I think this takes us in a really encouraging direction. For those who aren't aware, that this is kind of their second run-through of the design of this. It's significantly modified from the original design we saw these folks bring forward about a year ago. They've been engaging with planning staff that whole time, went before the planning commission both times. They've also attended a couple of town halls in the district, the latter of which we had about 150 people at. And I think what we're seeing here really demonstrates that they, in good faith, heard from the community, from the planning staff, from the planning commission, and changed their approach to align what this will look like to look more like what the community wants. And I think this does. A few elements I'd like to highlight. The large amount of green space and massive number of trees that they're planning to plant, I think, is a dramatic improvement on what's currently just a sea of asphalt. The infrastructure improvements, which include greater connectivity to the neighborhoods and traffic flow, is also no small feat when it comes to engineering the topography of the place. And perhaps most encouraging to me, while the commercial element is really encouraging because we need to revitalize the commercial uses that are currently not really being used there, is the housing component. When we talk about the housing crisis in Athens, this is going to bring a large amount of housing to the area, but I think it's different from the previous design. It's really phasing the design of that housing to look and function more appropriately with adjacent neighborhoods. And they've also utilized the math of our inclusionary zoning ordinance to look at how they'd incorporate some affordable units into this. And those affordable units include a % of the senior housing units that are up top. So it really checks a lot of boxes for need in the community, and especially on the west side where we need housing and public green space and commercial revitalization. It's also not lost on me that this is only going to be viable if we also move forward on some kind of TAD agreement. And so I've been waiting to be a part of those MARC meetings, the Mall Area Redevelopment Committee meetings, to really get the hard data on the halo effect, as we talk about, the economic benefit to the community that's not just on site, but that ripples out down the corridor and around the community, to feel like I can make an educated recommendation or not to this body about, our community's investment in it. But I have to say that all the information I've had to date has me really encouraged about the direction it's headed, and I feel optimistic about what will hopefully be good information at those MARC meetings.
Thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Hamby.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. And I think it's encouraging tonight that we see two different projects that are redeveloping existing projects. And I'm hopeful that that's a way we can moving forward with a lot of areas around town and looking at what we can redevelop and looking for partners who can help us do those redevelopments. Because right here and with the next one we'll be hearing, there's certainly more density added on, and you're doing it in such a way that's going to benefit the areas and our community. I will say this about the mall in particular, and Mayor, you remember this, being on a small committee that Mayor Denson at the time put together, that you were part of, and I was part of, and Commissioner Neesmith was part of, to look at, and we had some citizens involved as well, to look at the mall redevelopment area, or Atlanta Highway redevelopment is what it was at that time. And we had, at the time, engaged the Urban Land Institute out of Atlanta to come in and they spent a day with us looking at the Atlanta Highway area. And one of the things that sticks out in my mind, and there were a lot of things that stick out in my mind, one in particular was, when the mall got started, there was a vacancy of downtown businesses because everybody then went to the mall. And what the Urban Land Institute pointed out to us is that, well, if you want to redo Atlanta Highway, start with where it all began, with the mall. And so they're doing exactly that. They're starting with a redevelopment of an area that the Urban Land Institute suggested would be the catalyst for redeveloping the rest of Atlanta Highway. And I'd be curious to see it, and I still remember some other rezonings that we've done along Atlanta Highway that we haven't seen come to fruition just yet. I know there's a big one across from Sam's that calls for a lot of housing there. So this may help spur that along. So there's things in this project that I think that do show the community benefits. Certainly the housing, certainly the green space. Let's don't forget the stormwater. I'm not sure if that's a regional stormwater system, but it's certainly going to help the stormwater on that particular property as it exists now, which, as we've seen in the past couple of weeks, is something very, very important to us. But at any rate, I just can't help but think about the Atlanta Highway Committee. I also can't help but think about all those meetings Jerry Neesmith would drag me to for his citizens Atlanta Highway Committee, him and Denise Ricks, and talking about the Atlanta Highway and what can be done along businesses for Atlanta Highway. And I do feel like Commissioner Neesmith would be pleased to see this happening.
Commissioner Davenport.
Yes, you had me at trees, so I love it already. Just a question, and please forgive me if I missed this, but that police precinct, any discussion, will that stay there, or?
Yes, that's my understanding.
Okay, 'cause I look at the map. Okay, all right, thank you.
Commissioner Houle? Sorry, Commissioner Culpepper.
I was just curious, I love the idea, and I love redeveloping Atlanta Highway. What kind of traffic implications are we redoing these entrances to the property? We'll have to widen them, or because like where the old main entrance was a traffic light, and it's not a traffic light now, we're gonna have to add a traffic light there?
There is actually, as part of the Atlanta Highway Interchange project, you're going to see ramp up in front of Publix in those areas out there where they've relocated the Jennings Mill Road already. It's all part of a larger project that will modify the interchange of Atlanta Highway, and the terminus on the west end of that project is actually at the racetrack here. So all of this section of Atlanta Highway is going to be under redesign as part of that project. These developers have taken those plans into consideration. They're designing to be in coordination with the improvements on Atlanta Highway, so everything works seamlessly together. Our traffic engineering office has reviewed it, and they did not seem to have any significant concerns with traffic generation from the project based on the improvements that are taking place through a GDOT project in conjunction with this one.
Along the lines of pedestrian amenities, if you will, we have been in discussion with GDOT about a multi-use trail along the front of this property, or the bottom of the graphic there, which would then connect with a similar facility, perhaps funded by this government, going back towards Mitchell Bridge Road. So we are looking at that. That's not shown on this. That's not part of this approval, but Commissioner Culpepper, there's not just vehicular, but we're also looking at pedestrian connectivity as well.
And I think it's an important point, given that we've had this extended conversation about Mitchell Bridge and Timothy roads and wanting to make sure that there's good pedestrian and bike access on those roads. And that would ideally extend across the Loop Bridge, which is going to be completely rebuilt to be a wider bridge with better access, so that conceptually what you could do is you could walk from this property to the Barnes & Noble, buy a book, grab a cup of coffee, and walk back. So,
And Mayor, if I might, I will note that we have been closely talking with GDOT about what's possible, and the bridge is a bit of a pinch point, and so we may not get the full extent of a multi-use trail, but to the mayor's point, there would at least be a sidewalk across the bridge.
Well, if I could make a quick point, GDOT did put the sidewalk on the new Jennings Mill stretch there, so there's opportunities there, and that racetrack, I'm sure, will put a sidewalk in front of their facility once they're done. Or is it
yeah,
quick?
they were great to engage with around this. Commissioner Thorne?
And another amenity or plus is it will help with the impact and population at Cleveland Road Elementary. That school is, it's not up to full capacity, and I really think that this development will impact the student population, but it also could impact teachers finding a reasonable place to live, that they can ride a bike or however they want to get there. My son works at a school in New York, and he walks out his front door right into the school. So I think those little things, it will attract families, and I do think it'll help CSD with their staffing.
Commissioner Myers?
Yeah, I was scrolling through the report and saw that there's a really great graphic, the Georgia Square Mall redevelopment pedestrian circulation plan, that shows this multi-use path around and the sidewalks. You have to zoom in, but there's a lot of them. And then scroll down and found the plan that has all those trees that Commissioner Davenport referred to. I was really pleased to see those trees all over that pathway around there, and I could just imagine that filled with people walking, just as you see already on the Greenway, on the Firefly. If you go over to Winterville now, there's all these people just walking, and just so good for the health of our citizens to build that in, our residents to build that in right from the start. So I'm very appreciative of that.
Commissioner Hamby?
Yeah, I'm just going to be real brief in my point here, and just going back to the I guess the excitement of seeing this come to us, because this is rare, y'all. I mean, to have somebody come in and want to do a development that's this big and that will be this impactful to the community is something to really embrace and consider. I will say this to Commissioner Myers' point. I still remember the mall in its heyday when you could go there early in the mornings and see a bunch of older people walking around. I would go there and campaign sometimes and talk with the older folks trying to get their votes. So now I guess we'll be outside walking around that big trail to do it, but it's nice to see that trail there because I think that will be utilized in that way. Thank you.
I think that's right. And, I think it's worth pointing out that, what we've had, as we heard earlier, is, development interest that was willing to look at effectively a wholesale revision of their initial application. And oftentimes, of course, we have development interests who make minor modifications to a plan when we suggest that there needs to be some modification. But in this case, it was really a massive modification. But conjoined with all this are really a lot of decisions that this body has made. So, that ULI engagement of, was that a dozen years ago, Commissioner Hamby? At least, with Ryan Gravel, among others, was something that set the stage for this. Your approval of the tax allocation district model in the first place was something that set the stage for this, and the approval a year ago of the inclusionary zoning code all set the stage for this. So this, I do believe, is a huge win. And, to the question of existing residents, they're also going to be getting some walking trails. And for those folks who right now live further down Huntington, who really don't even have a sidewalk at all to walk on, this is going to be providing that should they want to go to the restaurants or the church across the street. It's going to be providing safety that they don't experience right now in their lives. So grateful for everybody. I know, Commissioner Houle, you've had a number of town halls, so thank you for doing that. All right. Yeah, Commissioner?
Just a couple things I wanted to add here. One was, really want to thank staff and people who were on this commission long before me for, some long-term planning. If there's something that I can look back on and say I was wrong about, it was TADS. I was very skeptical of TADS, and, the late Commissioner Neesmith, Mayor Gertz, Commissioner Hamby, and others were right about TADS. I mean, that's how we're here. And actually, I think a huge change between application number 1 and application number 2 is that our TAD process was better established and online. So when they went through round 2, they were able to actually engage that process in a way that didn't really exist the first time. And I think that's made a huge difference for how good this looks, because it's also made the funding of it possible. Another couple things I wanted to just share with, in response to colleagues' questions. One, Commissioner Culpepper brought up the question of traffic. And I think another thing that's just worth highlighting here, in addition to some of the GDOT work that the manager spoke to, is the transit transfer station. Our transit system currently isn't really able to serve the county as fully as everybody would like, because it needs to build capacity, and part of how it needs to build capacity is by bringing on these 3 additional proposed transfer stations, one of which would need to be on the west side. It would enable them to better serve the whole west side, including getting, to Cleveland Royal Elementary and other places that we can't currently. And that's included here. I mean, this is an opportunity for us to get one of those built in the heart of an area the transit department has identified, with partnership instead of all on our own. And I think that's a huge deal, and that will do a lot to mitigate traffic and increase mobility and quality of life. And then I know Commissioner Davenport asked about the police department. I don't know if it's formally captured in the application anywhere, but at every meeting, the developers have indicated their intention to retain the police department there. And that was even in round 1, never mind round 2, as well as their desire to try to retain as many of the existing commercial tenants as possible, while obviously trying to attract new ones. And then another big part of this, and I think this is part of the TAD application as well, is helping seed youth-oriented nonprofits. And for those who aren't aware, the Youth Force facility opened up in the mall, and I know that the people who are involved in this project are also very supportive of trying to see that move forward. And as I understand it, they're planning to retain that as this transforms as well. So hopefully it'll be a place for everyone to do a lot, including our youth.
All right, look forward to more, and obviously, as we noted in the earlier conversation, we'll have a discussion about the financial element of this, which is a separate vote, beginning with this group on the 31st. So, got another project next, so I'm going to turn it back over to Brad.
Thank you, Mayor. Next item is another planned development. This is 199 Stone Mill Run, 450 Baldwin Street. For those of us that have been around for a while, this is River Mill, so as we remember it. It's a request to rezone the parcel from RM2 to Commercial Downtown River District with a planned development, and from mixed density residential to downtown future land use. 7-story and a 9-story residential mixed-use building, 401 apartments, just under 1,000 beds, targeted for students. About 16,000 square feet of commercial space along the frontage of Baldwin Street, and 672 parking spaces. A couple of waivers. Really the big one on a property like this with limited frontage but larger acreage is the concern and their inability to hit that full 50% of your ground floor in leasable commercial space like you would see in a traditional downtown. They are providing the leasable commercial, as you will see it from Baldwin, but once you get back into the project, they are not providing, it'll be ground floor residential. And then there was a waiver from a buffer wall requirement of 10 feet as well. So you see the property here, and you see the restricted frontage there on Baldwin Street and how it opens up as you move to the back. This would be a total demolition of the River Mill apartments and redevelopment of the site. Mixed density residential to the commercial downtown future land use, and then the zoning change as well. So the overall property here, it's really essentially one large building. It's 2 different floor levels, 2 access points off of Baldwin Street that move back into the project with some parking in the very rear of the project that you see on the site plan. Some building elevations. This is the front building. Let's see here. This building, right? This piece of the 9-story building, and I'll show you a little more in a minute, basically comes here, it turns, and it runs all the way to the back. Once we get just beyond this point, this back section, which includes a lot of the parking too, drops down to a 7-story structure. But when we get into talking a little bit about building height in just a second, we measure our building heights by an averaging of a building from the top of the roof to the average grades around it. In this case, because this is such a long building and there's such a difference in topo on this end versus this end, this is what's creating some of the concern about building height right up here on Baldwin Street. So it'll make a little more sense There's a couple of graphics that I'll show you in just a second. But that is the frontage as you would see it from Baldwin Street. 2 floors of commercial with the residential over the top. Those are taller floor heights for the 2 commercial floors, which are pushing it up. But you can also see this line, and this is more easy to read in your plan, but where it says average grade elevation, that's the average floor area at the bottom across the length of the building. So that's what's driving up that height just a little bit in the front. This is what it would look like in perspective upon completion. You see the project that was recently completed and is now under construction immediately across the street in a kind of a shadowed perspective to show you how they would go together. But you can see from this drawing how the taller building goes back, turns, and runs to the back. That is the building that is measured independent of the building to the rear, which is fewer floors and drops down. But really, the area that staff had expressed concerns with was this piece right here. Planning staff recommended a condition on this to significantly lower it, and most of that was coming from the planning staff. This was an issue, in our opinion, largely driven around the potential for being much taller than the building across the street, trying to do almost a step back from a massing and scale standpoint, but it also served to address another issue that had been pointed out by the fire department. Certainly didn't. I think we were asking for them to remove 4 floors off of it from a planning department. We are dealing with a situation on this section of the building where we'd have 1 full residential floor based on the way that we measure our building heights that is completely over the 100-foot limit. It's in compliance with zoning as we measure it, but that did certainly raise a concern from the fire department standpoint that we had. We will have buildings out there that occasionally will go a few feet over to the top on one end because of averaging of the grades, but in this case we had a full floor over, which is in part what led to the staff recommendation to the Planning Commission. That is the area that I just pointed out. The area that it's in yellow was the area that we were requesting consideration to remove some of the height off of it. Planning Commission recommended approval with conditions. They did eliminate the condition 1, which we generated requesting a significant reduction in the height. And then they made some minor modifications on some of the other conditions, but certainly the 7 conditions that you have listed in your report from the Planning Commission, we have talked with the applicant. They are certainly comfortable with addressing all of those things and feel like they can do so within the construction of it. I will also note that you received, I believe on Friday, a memo and some information from our fire department. And that was in part at the request of the Planning Commission too. They saw that there were concerns from the fire department, but there really wasn't a lot of detailed information in what they had. And so they certainly encouraged our fire department if they could give some additional information to the commission to outline what some of those concerns were. They thought that would be helpful for you all in making your decision as well. And I think what Chief Scarborough's letter indicates in there really is that the 1 full floor that is completely above the 100-foot, if even that could be considered to be removed, it may possibly lessen the concern of the project. Certainly a very different change and a very different ask of the developer than the 4 stories that we were asking them to take off from a scale and massing standpoint. But so, and I certainly won't get into the details. I think it's a very good memo that Chief Scarborough wrote. I'm not sure that he's here this evening, but you've got that. So, so I won't go into any of the specifics on that, but I would encourage you to read it if you have not before you vote on this at the end of the month or at the first of the month. So with that, Planning Commission's recommending approval with those conditions. We tried to point out in our report that from just a standpoint of a good place to put high-density student housing, this is probably about as good as it gets in terms of proximity. We did not have an issue with the density or the location. There were just some design elements, most of which have been worked out. The other one, is part of what the chief had asked you to consider. But it was with that, it was not a unanimous vote, but it was a vote to approve by the Planning Commission.
Thanks, Brad. Is there any public input on this item?
Good evening. I'm Ed Lane with Smith Planning Group, and just want to speak on behalf of the River Mill project. So yeah, as Mr. Griffin mentioned, when we started working on this project, we were amazed at how many people would tell us that they remember when this was the hottest project in town. It was the place to live. And of course, that was in the 70s when this was built, and a lot has changed since then. And so the owner and developer of this parcel, American Campus Communities, has owned this since 2012, and they felt the time was right for a major reinvestment, redevelopment on this project. And so for the past 2 years, that's what they have been doing, assembled a local team of consultants and architects, and we have been working on this plan. And so, you know, in addition to, as was mentioned, this being a student housing project in a place that makes a lot of sense for student housing and adding higher density in a place that already has pretty high density, going through this PD process has also introduced a lot of unique things for all of Athens here. Many of those that I won't get into here, but can in the other presentation, but just public benefits. To people beyond just this project or students. And so we were able to respond to almost every piece of feedback that the Planning Commission gave us, and believe that it's a really strong project and hits a lot of different check marks. Now we do have a significant comment to address from the fire department that we understand needs to be resolved. And just to give a little context, because I think we all regret that this item is still here at this late stage in the game. In our preliminary submittal, we had received approval from the fire department, and we made changes and removed a story, but and we met code, but under closer examination, I think there was some discomfort with the area there that has been shown. And so the memo that the fire chief circulated, I think, was very helpful to further elaborate on those concerns and for us to understand that. And we were actually able to spend time with him today to further discuss that. And what we would like to do, speaking on behalf of the developer, is if we had some time to work with the chief and Commissioner Wright, is to remove one story from the yellow area there so that we can have a commissioner-defined option here that resolves the fire chief's concerns and gets everyone comfortable with the application. So that's what we would like to do between now and the next meeting, and I'm here available to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lane. Any other input on this item? All right, this is in District 4, so Commissioner Wright.
Yeah, I'm happy that the applicant was here so that any questions you guys have, I think that they are the appropriate professionals to address that. I do support this project, and I support the communications that are making it a little bit better at this point for everybody's consumption of it. I do want to point out some neat things that are happening on our riparian buffer. They're taking out, I think it's close to 35,000 square feet of impervious currently in the riparian buffer. So they're doing, you see this 1970s version of this hot ticket place. But anyway, so that's an addition there, and it's going to be open to the public as far as wandering on the trail and having yet another section that you can look at the river and look over at the other side that we have developed, that recent part of across from Dudley Park that now goes through the cemetery. So that's the good green space part of it. And so I'll be supporting that commission-defined option, bringing forward a commission-defined option as they've explained, as Mr. Lane has explained. And so if you have any questions, they can answer it.
Yeah, Mike.
Sure, thank you, Mayor. And I was actually one of the ones who lived in River Mill.
That was ancient.
Yeah, that was ancient. I actually can't remember if O'Malley's was there at the time I lived there, but.
I'm sure it was, Mike.
I'm sure it was. It may have been.
Mally's was there when I came.
No, it might, yeah.
Mally's was
But,
there.
it was
Lots of
interesting.
memories were fractured.
I still remember the place too. It was in the middle, one of the middle ones that didn't, it had a skylight, but didn't have any windows and didn't have a balcony. So it was the cheapest one there.
Yeah.
So it's encouraging to see something new happen for the benefit of those coming forward. I will say this, you know, we have to have all these discussions on stormwater and stuff that are going to be impacting our community for the next 10 years. And if we are to look at how we grow as a community, I'd much rather us look at growing up than growing out as far as density goes. This is one area where Planning Director Griffin is right. It's appropriate area for density. And it's not, and I think when we go and look at rezoning areas and stuff like that, we ought to keep that in mind. Where are the other areas that could be redeveloped that could help with our density problem that we're trying to help with affordable housing and stuff? And this is certainly one of them that's going to add to the density. So I say all that to say, when we're talking about stormwater for the next 10 years, we do need to be talking about fire service for the next 10 years. And when we look at that 100 feet limit, we've got to somehow address that in the near future, so that when we have projects that come along, we are able to meet the safety considerations that need to be met. So as we move forward as a body and as a commission, hopefully we can have those discussions.
Manager Williams, do you have any staff perspective on the
Yes,
coming
yes.
development-related needs?
Thank you, and I agree with Commissioner Hamby, and I appreciate the applicants, working with the fire chief on his concerns, and it's really helped us to understand some of our limitations from our fire response that, certainly if we want, and that is the way our land use is set up now, is to drive that urban redevelopment and higher density, and we're seeing those effects after 20 years, and we certainly have to modify our life safety operations to be able to accommodate that. And so all that being said, what that means is investing more in our fire department as far as personnel and equipment so that we can serve these taller buildings. That's what I want to share.
Carol?
Yeah, first I was really glad that to hear to Commissioner Wright mention the impervious surface and the increase there. I was just curious, this is 966 bedrooms, and I'm not sure how many that'll be reduced by taking away the one floor, but how many bedrooms are there now, just so we can?
I can,
Oh.
that one I can answer. I think it's 977.
On
And-
this plan,
Pardon?
on this plan, is that correct?
Bedrooms, yeah.
I think it's about half.
And it was in the 400 something.
400.
Oh, okay,
It was-
so it's sort of doubling
Right.
the density there.
Go ahead. It was 470 before. Go ahead. See, I shouldn't have tried to answer that question. It's very clear.
No.
Half. Yeah, go ahead.
That's right. It's about doubling it, and the question about how many will be removed, the architects have been working to try to make sure this works, to remove the story with no other impacts to the binding site plan. And I believe 4 bedrooms are going to be lost in the change, but, it's not much of a.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And while I'm looking at this, and I, be honest, I have not read through the whole thing yet, but I was very impressed by the 245 bike parking spaces and the car garage, and now I'm wondering if there's going to be electrification there for vehicles, or the infrastructure put in there to make them EV ready.
Yes, and that is mentioned in the report,
Okay.
that there will be EV spaces. We didn't put a number on that because some of the reasons that, the electrical engineer is not designing this, we don't, know how many would be appropriate for this location, but that's in the binding report. There will be some EV spaces.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Ed. Jesse?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, a couple of questions, and looking forward to the commission-defined option. The first is just kind of general, we get these things one at a time, and staff reviews them, and it says, whether and how there would be water and sewer capacity. But if it's not too much trouble, I'd like to request maybe staff give us some kind of briefing on just as our population continues to grow and we densify areas like downtown, we have lots of developments being approved at once. Like, at what point do we hit a tipping point where the system as a whole loses its ability to, service everybody adequately? Like, are we far from that tipping point, or are we approaching that tipping point as we continue to densify? I feel like I have no idea, and what we get is reports around how to widen a certain main or something, but I don't really feel like I understand well whether we're actually pushing things, too far on the whole. I don't know if you have a quick and easy answer to that, or if that's.
I don't, and that's a big question and a good question. But I can tell you that, we are responding to this government historically, and elected officials that came before you, I think, do a marvelous job of sort of looking out ahead and anticipating what issues are and then adjusting before you get there. So things that are important but not yet urgent. Last couple of years, it's been more of a little bit of an exercise in urgency, and I feel good about, there's several ways in which we would accommodate additional population and density, mostly infrastructure. So you alluded to mains, so, sewer mains, water mains, interceptors. Y'all are investing right now, the Brooklyn Creek interceptor, that's a $23 million project. So there's significant investment going on right now. We're partnering with the university on the Tanyard branch that goes by the stadium. So I feel like we're doing a good job of looking around the bend as far as our public utilities are concerned. Stormwater is, the impervious surface and things, that's always something that we've got to be mindful of. The fire, that was one that, I think the chief had been concerned about for some time, but now is becoming more of a, an issue, something to deal with to be prepared for the future. So, Commissioner Hull, I say all that to say that, we could spend a lot of time, trying to address that, or maybe we can have a conversation about those things that we need to look at very closely.
Just a couple of notes I'd make about aggregate demand within the public utilities space. Of course, this body made a decision to make a very significant purchase for water resiliency in purchasing of the quarry next to the airport. So that's kind of one side of the big aggregate equation. The other side, the sewer side, we've got 3 sewer treatment plants that together allow for almost 28 million gallons a day in sewage treatment. We only use about 12 million of that, so we've got lots of capacity there. The piece that I couldn't even dive into is the more corridor by corridor piece. But in the big picture, I talked to community leaders from around the state, and I mean, our system is the envy of many. I'll say that.
And the water reuse as well.
That's right.
Will help add to the stock of water. I will say this though too, and I don't remember when we did this, but it may be outdated by now. But if I remember correctly, a few years ago we did issue a moratorium on multifamily for downtown. If I remember, to answer the exact same questions that you were asking, Commissioner Hall, and I don't know where that study is. I'm sure it's online somewhere, or Brad has it somewhere. But I think it looked at that question, if I remember correctly. What do we have the capacity?
It was probably 10 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago. So where we are in terms of where we were then versus now, probably very outdated. But
you look a lot older.
I feel a lot
Sorry,
older.
I'm just joking. I've lost more hair.
We can see, yeah. But that's really, any report that we ever send to this group for consideration of a zoning change or land use change always comes to you with a review from our utilities department to ensure, that it's been looked at. And as we begin to move into our land use map update and our subsequent comprehensive plan, there is a lot that goes into that comprehensive plan. It's not just a zoning and land use is driven largely by infrastructure, and infrastructure means your water plan and your transportation. All those pieces come together, and you'll be seeing that over the next 4 to 5 years.
And the transportation, for instance, we've got a long-range transportation plan, and Maycourt's, But like Commissioner Culpepper asked a good question tonight, when you have a significant development, what's the traffic look like? So it's also on all of, I think y'all, as you make decisions and having, a bigger awareness of the impacts on the community, you help to govern that as well.
It's a good segue.
Good segue.
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Hamby that building up is better than building out, especially in our dense urban core. It's better from a climate perspective, it's better for reducing traffic, it's also, cheaper on our infrastructure if we're anticipating the capacity. But if that report was 10 years ago, 10 years ago, the conversation seemed to be, very different around housing. We had what was at least felt like and thought of as a housing surplus. This is a cheap place to live. Now we have a housing shortage. There's a high premium on everything. And, anything staff can give us that would help assuage my living concern about whether, if we keep approving these ad hoc, do we suddenly end up in a situation where the facility that services downtown is overwhelmed, especially on the sewer side where we don't have the quarry to back it up. And then I am confused about the fire thing, so I'm glad to hear that there's a CDO that's maybe going to remedy this, but the whole thing struck me as odd, because am I correct that there are buildings downtown that are already taller than this?
There are. Yeah.
So how do we end up in a situation where
That-
the height is an issue for a new one, but not for an old one?
Well, anyway, it's a good question.
Kind of discern between the kind of planning and
question.
zoning code and the fire apparatus.
I can't speak to the elevations of downtown buildings. Brad?
I mean, the buildings that would be considered to be significantly over height are generally buildings that were built pre-zoning. They're in place, they're there, we have the obligation to serve and protect them, and, the building height has been set at 100 feet for probably as long as I've worked here. We've got some buildings that are over 100, but I'm not aware of any that have been built under the zoning ordinance since it was adopted with the 100-foot, and since I've been here, where we had enough grade change and the building was of a large enough size that we were able to pick up a full floor of building above the 100-foot mark, and that's what we're dealing with on a small portion of this one. I think the low end of the Hyatt Place may be a few feet over.
Well, there's also other pieces to this. The high part of this building was on a elevation that could not accommodate the fire truck with the stabilizers that go down. So, as Brad said, there may be some, there's all sorts of stormwater that's not great that was done pre-code. So, things like that happen. I think that for years, the walking around talk was, well, we're limited to 100 feet because of our ladder, our fire ladders. And that's not the case. As the chief has laid out in his memo, it's the staffing to be able to perform all those jobs that have to be done when a structure that big is on fire. And that is not his arbitrary judgment. That is based on NFPA standards, and we know about that. So, it's not optimal. Chief Scarborough would tell you that they're stretched when it comes to these larger buildings. And also think about the proximity of our larger buildings to other large buildings when it comes to fire spread in downtown. So, again, I think we're at a good spot. The applicant's going to work with us on the design to talk to the chiefs. We definitely need to explore further about the chief's concerns and what kind of staffing and equipment's required so that we can safely deal with these types of emergencies.
So even with the new state-of-the-art truck that has the tallest ladder in North America, we also just need the staffing to get up that ladder and to handle all this.
Well, I want to caution everybody for making, just because a ladder can go straight up. So there's an angle to ladders, and then you have to get further away. And y'all, we've had conversations the last couple of weeks about, concerns about where overhead utility lines are in reference to the ladders and how we access it. The lighting downtown that crosses Clayton Street or goes along it, we had to change that for fire ladder purposes. So there's a lot that goes into it that isn't readily apparent.
Well, of course, on the staffing front, some of it's not just exterior activity, but it's interior support in the tragic midst of a prospective fire, like managing stairwells and the like.
And on this note, maybe this will allow us to wrap up this meeting so this birthday girl can get on home. Hyatt, remember we approved them putting high bar on the roof? And that was the elevator shaft and that accommodation. So there are people dwelling, not 24 hours a day, I don't think, up there. But anyway, so we do have accommodations that we've made in that remark and in that respect. But again, we're going to work on a commission-defined option so that we're not concerned about that for the people who are going to be living in this updated. And again, quality as well as affordable housing, because this place is definitely time for a redo, this current. So can we move on to another topic?
Thanks for working on the
It's different,
CDO. I appreciate that, Commissioner. Brad, you want to talk a little bit about comp plan?
I am going to turn this one over to our Assistant Director, Bruce Lonnie, who's going to come up. Bruce and Stephen Jaques in our office have been kind of spearheading this 5-year update of our comp plan. So, Bruce?
Okay, I will make it quick. And I appreciate y'all's patience. We've got an 18-month process to update our 2018 comprehensive plan, and we're at the 2/3 mark. So we've got a bit of a milestone and a decision moment that we promised would be coming to you, and here we are. Working with a steering committee that was put together since last January, we have been diligently stepping through that adopted plan in 2018 to update information in that document. And the update is largely, I want to explain what it is and what it's not, because I think that was a question every other time we've talked about this, and it's important to understand. There's a lot that's happened over the last 5 years, and what we're trying to fold into this document is changes in data. One of the things with our comprehensive planning cycle that's tough, ours is always due on the 8th. Well, the census comes on the 0s. And so we're usually working with data that's about 8 years removed from being pretty good. And so this is an opportunity for us to buff that out. So we're using it as an opportunity to bring better data forward. We're also using it as an opportunity to take land use decisions that you've already adopted through amendments to the future land use map that you do monthly. Those are folded in. There's a number of documents and studies that have findings that you've also adopted. We're folding those things in. And so we aren't really rewriting the comprehensive plan in the sense that we've done in the past where we've had a 2-year process of public input. We're collecting the information that's already happened over the 5 years, putting it into a bit of a compendium so that we can send it off to the state, along with the 5-year report card on what we've done since 2018 to 2023. And I saw a couple of emails asking questions about what am I looking at, and those are absolutely fair. The report card that's in here is new content. It is telling you what you've done. There are a number of pages about what remains to be done, and there's a 5-year work program to get us to 2028. And that's at the back of this document. What I would like to offer to do is, in response to some of the email traffic I did see, we have some edits that we would like to make that aren't substantive, but I think they will clarify what you're looking at. If we could make those changes and then get hard copies, because I also saw people saying, hey, I'd really like a hard copy. If we could make those changes and get the hard copies to you by Monday, I think that may help the discussion. But I'm certainly able to answer any questions you may have here this evening, and absolutely would love to talk to you the rest of this week if you want to reach out to me about questions you have about content. But we're not really editing. It's not a comprehensive plan in that sense. It's a compendium of information and activity that we as a community have already done. And what we'd really like to get to do, and if I had more time, I would springboard off of, I won't, but off of Commissioner Hoole's comments about how do we do this stuff comprehensively, that's what we want to get to. So this is a checkpoint to get this in front of the state, to get us moving forward so that we can then get working on a new future land use map for the entire community, very diligently. So I will stop right there.
Thanks for that, Bruce. Questions about that or process moving forward?
No, but I just appreciate anything that would indicate to us and to the public also looking at this, what the pages are that are really updates from the old report.
Yeah.
Just because there's a lot of material, and that would help to understand
Sure.
what's in the update.
yeah, I will do that.
John?
Talking about sewer capacity, is that something that could be incorporated in that? So we know where we are, gallons per day, and like with the stuff that we've approved?
So with the new land use plan that we're going to begin working on, all of that infrastructure information folds into how we look at alignment of land use and capacity for a 20-year window, if not beyond. And we'll be absolutely working on that over the next 12 to 18 months. But that's not part of this document right now.
Well, Bruce, and while we're here, I thought it was really neat how when we tried to develop our population projections based on, water basins. Would you mind describing that just briefly?
Yeah, briefly.
Sorry.
So one of the things that we took on a number of years ago was realizing the inaccuracies of our census data and trusting our local data. And our GIS is really great. So we created a series of opportunities, really, really small, some of them an acre in size, where we can do population projections. And they break out into basins so that we can look at population projections in subbasins and entire basins. We've run the numbers out through 2050. And that's a lot of the analysis that we share with our engineering departments as they let contracts for capital improvement programs and the other things that you end up seeing. They're using that data for our projected growth. And it's using, as close as we can, primary data that we collect here on the ground in Athens. We're not using a third-party source for that.
Thank you, Bruce. The reason I brought that up, not to prolong the meeting, but that's unique. I have not really heard where we use that as a basis of population projection. It speaks to both your concerns, Commissioner Houle and Culpepper, about how we plan for additional people and density and how we have our infrastructure there. So it goes down to that level of detail.
Jesse?
Yeah, I've been pleased to hear planning staff really emphasize the desire for public input in all this and to see this as kind of the start of really getting into a more robust revision moving forward. And, it's often the case that people pay the most attention when you get close to decision time. I've had a lot more people reach out to me about the comp plan in the last few weeks than the entirety of the previous 2 years I was on the commission. So could we get, if possible, in conjunction with whatever agenda item we have on our voting meeting, some kind of summary of the anticipated timeline for public input to the next round, just so while we're on the front end of it, people can be thinking about how they can engage in the future, since I know lots of folks are sharing concerns about, things they'd like to see built in.
Yeah, I mean, it's two separate processes. So I would want to be careful to make sure that we're not confusing things. The timeline that we're on to get to the state, we're at a decision point for a vote in February, hopefully, and then that keeps us in line for an adoption prior to June. The work we're doing on the comp plan for the land use component, for essentially the 2028 comprehensive plan, we're going to start right away, and a timeline for that hasn't really been fleshed out yet, but we will have it, and it's going to bake in a lot of analysis on the front end. Then we'll have checkpoints with the public along the way, and it'll be pretty robust.
Okay.
So
Well,
we can
maybe even since that timeline's probably a lot to try to work out and you're juggling a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe even just a brief memo that's easily shareable that kind of tells people how they can engage in the future. Where to look, what
Sure.
Notices to sign up for, that sort of thing.
We have a general beginning to end timeline that you all saw in the work program. But in terms of being able to plug in dates of meetings at this point, I think it'd be better and easier for them to understand as a general. And that was we held 5 public meetings in the month of December around the community, and that was the basis. 1, to explain what this process is, very much like what Bruce just did, but 2, because they came and they were interested, to try to get them excited about the process moving forward and to continue to come and to participate. And so we can put that together for you.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on this? All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, got a motion from Commissioner Hamby, second from Commissioner Myers. All in favor? Any opposed? All right, everybody have a great night.
Down to O'Malley's.